Hey everyone, welcome back to the Collector's Compass, the official podcast of Collectors MD, where we explore the intersection of collecting, mental wellness, and responsible engagement across the modern hobby and beyond. I'm your host, Alyx Efron, founder of Collectors MD, and today's episode is an important one because it sits at the intersection of access, behavior, and responsibility in a digital world that moves faster than our ability to slow it down. I'm joined here by Matt Zarb-Cousin, who is the co-founder of Gamban. Matt founded Gamban over a decade ago to help people quit online gambling by putting real friction between individuals and high-risk digital environments. What makes this conversation especially relevant for our audience is that Gamban isn't just about traditional gambling anymore. As more hobbies and spending verticals move online, from sports cards to sneakers to crypto to live marketplaces, the mechanics that drive risk have started to look eerily similar. This episode isn't about blaming platforms, hobbies, or individuals. It's about understanding how modern systems shape behavior and why guardrails matter in spaces that were never designed with well-being in mind. At Collectors MD, we believe healthier systems lead to healthier behavior. And Gamban represents a practical, stigma-free example of what protection can look like when willpower alone isn't enough. Matt, I really appreciate you joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Yeah, really good to meet you and see you in person. We've obviously corresponded quite a lot over email, and my colleague Melissa has told me about a lot of the work that you've been doing, and it's very, very interesting. There's a lot of crossover with compulsive collecting and with gambling-related harm, and the mechanics, I think, of these websites and what they use to try to keep you engaged. There's just a huge number of parallels, and we're just really happy that we can help in some way kind of address some of this, the problems that arise from it.
Yeah, really appreciate you saying that. And for those listening, just to give a little bit of context, we have partnered with Gamban this past year. It was actually, I think, around June, July of 2025, where we basically locked in a partnership to help spread awareness around the modern day hobby and how there are so many gambling like mechanics going on in things like break culture and repacks and other sort of nuances that have really burst onto the scene over the last several years. And so Gamban, in addition to blocking traditional gambling platforms, now also blocks apps like Whatnot and Fanatics, I believe eBay. There are several others, but really the purpose of it is not to say that those platforms are inherently malicious or evil, or that like you shouldn't spend your time using them. But there are folks who do need to set those internal guardrails and basically be able to prevent themselves from participating in a behavior that has spiraled out of control and has started to create a lot of harm in their lives. So we, as part of our partnership, we are collectively just helping spread awareness around this, letting folks know that Gamban exists and that if you need to sort of take a time out or self-exclude, this is a really great third-party option to do so. And so it is intended to be a layer of support as far as our tools and resources go for our community members, those who are looking to abstain completely and, again, prevent themselves from being able to access some of these, risk-associated harm or what could potentially lead to harm type of platforms. So with that, we are going to transition over to our first segment, and that is the origin story, why Gamban had to exist. So what did you see, Matt, early on that made you say people don't just need advice, they need actual blocking software?
So it wasn't until 2014 that the UK legalized online gambling formally and started to regulate it. It was always legal. It was never illegal, but the formal regulatory framework didn't come in until 2014. And there were, at that stage, around 1,500 applications for licenses, the vast majority approved. So you had a huge number of online gambling operators that were already really present in the UK, but finally now under formal regulatory structure. And it was pretty clear to me that there's a confluence of factors. I think obviously the legalization of online gambling, the subsequent advertising that took place of these platforms, the number of licensees, the number of operators, and the ability to access these sites and apps wherever you are because of smartphones and because of 4G internet connection and all of that kind of stuff, all of those technological developments that kind of enabled access to these products wherever you are at any time of day for the first time ever. It was pretty clear to me that we needed at the very least a multi-operator self-exclusion option so people could opt out. That was the government did commit to doing that, but it took 4 years, and that was GamStop when that came out. So if you self-exclude on GamStop, that stops you signing up to any legal online gambling site in the UK. But the problems have arisen where people have now started to access other forms of gambling that are not legalized, are not regulated, after they've self-excluded in many cases. So they can't access the legal and regulated market. They're accessing crypto casinos, they're accessing leverage trading platforms. They may even develop compulsive collecting. That might be something that they use to displace the gambling addiction in some way, or there's very similar characteristics there. So we wanted to make Gamban as holistic as possible. So if you were to download Gamban onto your device, it would block all activities from which gambling harm could arise.
Right.
Harmful behaviors could arise. So that doesn't just include things that are regulated gambling, but also the other platforms that I mentioned. We're very keen to take swift action when we see something emerge, like predictions, for example, prediction markets, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously growing at a considerable rate.
Yep.
That's not regulated as gambling. It's regulated by the CFTC in the US. So, that's like supposedly a futures exchange product. We blocked those. So we wanted to create something where wherever you are in the world, if you put it on your device, you won't be able to access any gambling website or app. We're now up to about 410,000 domains on the block list. So it's substantial. And we're adding about 700 a day. So there's the scale of online gambling, not just legal online gambling, but the whole of online gambling globally is enormous. And I don't think people have really got to grips with that. And one of the things we've had experience of in the US is where a state would legalize online gambling, whether that's online sports betting or iGaming, the first thing they would do is obviously issue licenses. They'd open the application for licenses. It would very often be quite a small number. I mean, in New York, I think it's 12 sports betting licenses that were issued. And then the first thing they'll do is say, well, we need self-exclusion. We need to have an option for people. If you want to self-exclude from the license market, they can do that. That's great. That's very important. But it's 12 operators out of 410,000 domains globally. So it really is a drop in the ocean. And we think that if we can make Gamban as difficult to remove as possible on as many devices as possible, and we've just launched a new version for iPhones where if people, it's in beta at the moment, but people can download that onto their iPhones and it's impossible to remove for the duration of the protection. If we can get that right, then we are able to basically have a de facto self-exclusion that's global.
Yeah, this is all really, really interesting, especially from like a global standpoint, right? Because obviously you're based in the UK, and the UK and the United States operate quite differently in terms of regulation and oversight and the way the infrastructure is set up. Here, obviously, it's at a state level, so not every single state operates the same way. And so, yeah, I mean, one thing that's always really just been interesting to me, and I think it's, really worth pausing on this conversation to address, is that the UK legalized and normalized gambling like way earlier than the US. And because of that, it's had much more mainstream staying power, right? The UK, in the UK, you have the betting shops and the sports books and the online gambling, and all of that didn't arrive, with this big cultural shockwave. They've been around for a long time, and it was gradual. It became woven into, I think, daily life, right? Between soccer, you guys call football culture, and other sports that are popular overseas, and in pubs and ads on the sides of stadiums. It didn't necessarily like all hit at once. People sort of grew up around it. There was like this sense of familiarity. There was a social understanding. There were norms, for better or for worse. And I think the US did the opposite, right? We spent years saying, this is illegal, this is taboo, this is too dangerous. And then almost overnight, we flipped the switch, and suddenly it was everywhere. Apps on your phone, celebrity endorsements, integrations into networks like ESPN, odds baked directly into the broadcasts. What took the UK sort of decades to normalize, the US really tried to compress into just a few years. And when something shows up that fast, it doesn't just change the behavior, it overwhelms it. So what's, also interesting is that the UK's sort of longer runway forced earlier conversations about things like responsibility, guardrails, and harm reduction, right?
Absolutely. And the key difference being that people in the UK, growing up in education, will be aware of gambling as being part of kind of society. They'll be aware of growing up seeing the adverts for the National Lottery. For if you go down to any seaside kind of area in Britain, you'll be sort of confronted with amusement arcades, which is a premises where obviously you can play on video games, but you can also gamble. And there's actually machines that children are allowed to gamble on in the UK legally. So the category E machines, low stakes machines. So this idea of like gambling being a part of the culture and something you grow up with, and it's very normalized and you're desensitized to it, I think it's absolutely the case. I think the potential for harm is therefore, I think that there's still therefore the potential for harm because of the accessibility of certain types of gambling, like through smartphones. I think, we weren't prepared, I don't think, when we were at school for like the idea of slots and roulette and casino table games being on devices we carry everywhere with us, where we will be able to, do everything on. Like, I think that's really changed the game too. But I think what you're saying is correct. And there's a huge risk where a generation of people that are too old to be in education have been confronted with this wave of hyper normalization through the media, through like all the kind of levers that the gambling industry has pulled to try to reach people and insert itself, I think, into the kind of cultural fabric. And they're not fully aware of the risks either. And they're kind of, it's maybe the first time certain people in certain states will have played casino table games, right, on their phone, which is like not really what it was. I mean, not to defend casinos or anything necessarily, but that's not where the games were intended to be played. It was supposed to be played in a venue and with a certain pace and as a relatively social activity compared to just gambling alone on your phone without any accountability whatsoever. So that's that. A lot has changed, I think, since we legalized online gambling. And my argument here in Britain has been to say that so much has changed technologically and how we deliver that product to people that we need to look again at the gambling legislation. We need to have a proper review of the gambling law, which at the moment doesn't really take into account like how easy it is for someone to act on an impulse to gamble. And I think why for me Gamban is important is like putting that friction in the way between the urge or impulse you might have to gamble and the actual act of gambling. You can do it within seconds if you've got a smartphone, and it's that kind of lack of intentionality. We used to have it when if you wanted to play roulette or you wanted to play blackjack or something, you'd have to go to the casino. You have to get in your car or get a taxi to the casino, and you'd have to plan it, and there'd be an element of like, this is going to take a bit of time to figure out, and by that point you might not have the urge to gamble, right? It's probably going to be something that you plan days or weeks in advance, right? So for me, it's exploiting. I think it's inherently exploitative of us as humans, because if you make something that's bad for us too easy, and particularly something you can get addicted to, then you're going to make it really, really difficult for people to quit. And that, unfortunately, I think that's where we've got to with so many things. And the collecting is, I mean, I remember growing up, I was probably addicted to Pokemon cards when I was growing up, right? Like, it's just, that's kind of looking back at it, like, and some of the work that we've done with your organization has kind of made me reflect on it. But it's a great example. But I'm just thinking now, if I could have done that on my phone, that would have been a complete disaster.
Oh yeah. It's only gotten progressively worse as technology has improved and things have become so much more accessible and just so much easier to consume. Everything is, just magnified to the nth degree, right? So, you brought up some really, really sharp points there. I think, one thing that's really important to call out is that here in the US, most states give you the option to self-exclude through, their local state gambling board or gaming commission. And so, I'm not exactly sure how it's set up in the UK, but, Gamban works as an additional layer to that, because obviously there are ways that you can access gambling or gambling related platforms that don't aren't sort of in that orbit of apps and platforms that would fall under that sort of jurisdiction, right? So there's the offshore betting and websites. There's the crypto platforms that people can use their VPNs to access, like Stake and Roulette, and those. I don't think those would fall under the self-exclusion in terms of you not being able to log in, because they're not even stateside yet. They, I think, exist overseas and in Canada. And so again, people have to download VPNs on their phones in order to basically spoof, the operating system into thinking their location is somewhere else. And so that's why Gamban is so important. But also you mentioned the crypto and the predictive markets, which have become super popular, and of course collecting, and there are just so many other avenues where people could just spiral out of control so easily, especially because, again, modern technology makes everything so accessible. And so the beauty of Gamban is that you download it on your phone and it'll prevent you from joining pretty much any of those, like you said, apps that can drive that gambling related harm. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like willpower alone, obviously for somebody with an addiction, isn't enough. So when did it become clear to you that, people needed real, guardrails in place to prevent themselves from accessing certain digital environments?
For me personally, I did have a gambling addiction when I was younger, but it was to machines in betting shops where you used to be able to gamble on roulette, played at like one spin every 20 seconds. You used to be able to bet up to £100, which is, I don't know what the current exchange rate, $120. But back in 2006, it was sort of, inflation adjusted, quite a lot of money, and it still is. And that used to be able to stake that every spin. And obviously, you start betting small amounts, and then you obviously get desensitized to that. You might have an early big win. You might then start losing again and then chase it. And then you just into a cycle of loss chasing. And that was kind of, it's a tale as old as time. It's everyone's sort of gambling experience. They start when they start winning, and then they believe that, they convince themselves that that's possible in perpetuity. And that was my kind of general experience. And it culminated in me staking up to the maximum and being in a huge amount of debt towards the end, and wanting to just feed the addiction at any opportunity I could. Any money I could get my hands on, I would gamble with. And it takes you to a very, very dark place, particularly when you can't then, if you run out of money, if you obviously you play to gamble till you've lost all your money or money you have access to, and then then you're in a really, really dark place. And thankfully I was able to quit. But I believe I was only able to, I like to think I would have been able to quit if I was addicted to online gambling, which wasn't really a thing when I started gambling. But it would have been way harder because I used to have to go to the betting shop, and the betting shop, there were lots of betting shops. There's lots of betting shops in the UK at the time. There was probably about 9,000 in the country. So there's quite a lot of different premises where you could go to, and there was one very local to me. But in any case, I would have to go and physically go. And when these same products that I got addicted to on the machines started to appear on the apps on smartphones, I thought that is going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. And it was pretty clear as well that there was no sufficient blocking software available really for people. There was nothing adequate that was available. It was either a bit too intrusive and slowed devices down, or it didn't block enough. And we wanted to get the balance right where it didn't impact the device's performance, but it just blocked gambling and not gambling keywords, or we wanted it to just block gambling websites. And that meant building the block list and having now to this day methods where we can detect new sites as they emerge and confirm them and all that kind of stuff. So when was the moment I thought that this was needed? I mean, I met my co-founder, Jack Simmons, who was addicted to gambling, and he was very frustrated that there was nothing available for Mac. No blocking software was available for Mac computers. So he tried to develop one himself as a kind of prototype, and we brought some other people in, and we got some investment, and we built versions for every device. And then we started offering it to people. Initially, we wanted to give it for free to people. We thought that, it's always been a mission-driven company, but I'm sure as a fellow founder, as you've recognized, things cost money to sustain. And, we've now got a team of 16 in-house developers, customer support, outreach, stakeholder management, marketing, business development. We've got the whole team is very, very dedicated, and we want to make blocking software as good as it can be, because we really believe in it as something that can, I think, really help in the early stages of recovery. When we interview our users, it's very similar stories. They'll be addicted to gambling. They'll have a particularly bad session where they've lost a lot of money. They'll say, I'm never doing that again. And then they want to do something positive. And that is usually self-excluding or downloading Gamban or something like that. And then it's like, if we're available there at that moment when someone wants to take positive action to prevent future harm, that can make a big difference. But we have to be effective, and as effective as we can. Otherwise, it's a missed opportunity. So we really, we know how important it is that people have that. And then we encourage people in the app to go to treatment. We encourage people to do other things, to enhance their likelihood of abstinence.
Yeah, that's really important too, because blocking the platforms is great for, limiting your ability. But as an addict, with lived experience myself as well, I know firsthand how the mind works when it's just craving that dopamine, that chase, that need to continue the activity. And so gambling addicts will go to great lengths in order to do that. And so that's why, early intervention is important, whether that be through peer support or outpatient, inpatient treatment at a professional facility, therapy, meeting with a psychiatrist, all of these additional layers. Obviously, there's financial fallout associated, so you might need to get in touch with a financial counselor or advisor. There are a lot of layers that are a part of the whole process of recovery. So I appreciate the fact that you guys acknowledge that and help point folks in the right direction. So we touched on this, obviously, with modern technology exploding and smartphones making it so much easier to participate in these types of activities. And we're not just talking about a digital version or a gamified version of blackjack or roulette. Like, we're talking about real live dealers sitting inside of a casino with a high definition video recorder camera on them, and you're sitting there from your smartphone on the entire device, and it feels like you're quite literally sitting there. But the difference is, from a personal experience standpoint, is that you're not sitting there in front of another person. They can't see you. So that layer of like guilt and shame and embarrassment might not be as overwhelming as it would be in person, where you're sitting there and you're on tilt and you're just losing hand after hand and just draining away your money. You're going to the ATM to take more cash out. Like, you can do that all from the comfort of your home, and you don't have to worry about anybody judging you or calling you out or any of that. So that's, I think, a huge part of the danger and the added risk that comes with being able to participate in these types of activities from the comfort of your couch or your bed, and so I want to unpack that a little bit more. You've been doing this for over a decade. So what has changed the most about online behavior and online temptation that makes this problem more urgent now than when you started?
Yeah, I actually saw a clip today from an Australian comedian, and Australia obviously has the highest gambling losses per capita, so per person.
Sure.
And the gambling is entrenched in their culture. They've got lots of like venues that have machines and all that kind of stuff. But online sports betting is obviously taking it to another level. And this guy was saying we should end online sports betting we should only be allowed to bet in person, because some of the wagers that I put on, I would not if I had to look someone in the eye when I was actually putting the money on, because obviously it's just even that level of accountability is gone,
Sure.
right? Where you take a bet slip to, if you're in a betting shop or a sports book or whatever, and it's a bit of a ridiculous bet, you might think twice about it, or whatever, that even that's gone. So I think the ability or the ease at which people will engage with much riskier wagers, so parlays and prop bets, and obviously we call parlays accumulators, right? Which are just, you have basically no chance of winning, right? Very often,
Right.
Some of they're just ridiculous. You might as well just give the money over in the first instance, right? So I mean, I'm not saying that at low stakes that doesn't enhance the enjoyment of perhaps watching sports for some people, but it's the ease at which people can do it now, and the manner in which the interface, the UI, the UX, the user experience of the apps tries to encourage people to do the more riskier wagers where they've got less chance of winning. And bear in mind as well that these sites and apps have huge amounts of data on customers, and they use it to profile individuals extremely rigorously, so that they're able to target them with tailored incentives that they know that they're more likely to take up. So it's steering people to behaviors that are not really in their interest. And I think that that's the thing that's changed. I mean, in the betting shop or in a venue or a premises, it might have been set up in a certain way that optimized people's kind of engagement with that premises or whatever, or made them more likely to put a bet on. I'm sure that the things that had been thought about. We know that in casinos, for example, real life casinos, they've got very ugly carpets on purpose because they want people to keep their heads up, so they look at the tables and look at the machines. It's in the very good book called Addiction by Design by Natasha Dalshaw. It's very interesting how they kind of arrange the casinos. But online casinos take it to a completely different level, and the level of kind of tailored, bespoke, targeted behavioral nudges that are designed to get people to do things that are not in their interest, I think is what's changed. And that's why you're getting a lot more people engaging with products where they don't have a chance of winning. And it's not, parlays theoretically do have a chance of winning. Slots, roulette, blackjack, in the long term, zero chance of winning. You're never going to get an edge where there's a mathematical house advantage for the, so that's the thing I think is quite scary, really. I don't think people are fully aware of the manipulation that takes place from the operator side.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, and we're going to get into this in a bit, but there's a comparison. There's a sort of a through line in terms of the way that is set up within the collecting world, right? You think about the concept of walking into a local card shop, your local hobby shop, buying a hobby box of cards, sitting there, ripping it open, and then being disappointed. So going back for another, and then you're interacting with the cashier. There are other customers in the store. You're sitting there ripping box after box after box, and you start sweating, and the back of your neck gets really hot, and you just feel like this overwhelm where this is so embarrassing. I feel ashamed. Whereas like same thing with the live platforms, live marketplaces, you can go on there and just with the ease of a tap on the screen, spend thousands of dollars and nobody knows who you are. You hide behind a screen name or a handle, and it's more or less the exact same behavior, just in a different form, right? We always say that, the hobby, in a lot of ways, the modern hobby, break culture, it's a gambling machine disguised as a childhood pastime. And that's even more dangerous, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think all of this is really, really important. And I want to get into how Gamban works. So the blocking, the removal friction, and the multi-device protection. So let's get practical for a minute. Walk our listeners through how Gamban actually works, what it blocks, how it protects how it protects across devices, and why multi-device coverage is so important.
Sure. So a user will sign up on the website, gamban.com. They'll create an account. If they're in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, they can get Gamban for free through timeoutohio.com. And we will take very minimal data on sign up either way, whether they sign up through Gamban or through a distributor. We'll take just an email and a name, and then the account will be created, and we will then ask people to log in to their account on their computer, install the protection from their account. Just a very, very simple process of just clicking a couple of buttons, running the installer. That will then be on the device for the duration of the protection that the user has chosen. At the moment, Gamban is $34.99 a year, but that's for up to 15 devices. So if they've got an account, we would then, once they've got an account, we would then say, download the app for your phone or for your tablet or whatever, and then log in again, download the protection from the app, and you can, as I say, repeat this process up to 15 times. It's really important that people do it on all their devices, because when they're in that moment where they want to take positive action, that feeling is not going to last. You're going to get an urge to gamble in a few days, or maybe even sooner. So getting all the barriers in place at that point is really important. And once you've got that protection installed, it's very, very difficult to remove for the duration of the license. And you can choose a month, a year, or if you're getting it through a distributor, up to 5 years. And it will block all the conventional gambling websites and apps, as well as the things we've talked about. So Whatnot and leverage trading platforms, eToro, Trading 212, Binance, crypto exchanges. It will block all the things where people are gambling harm can arise, particularly for people who are addicted to gambling, who have decided that they need blocking software to stop themselves from accessing these types of products. So we don't want people to be in a situation where they want to quit online gambling because they got addicted to sports betting, install Gamban, and then suddenly find something that's arguably even worse than that, which is something like leverage trading. In my view, is one of the worst things. It should never, in my view, it shouldn't be accessible to retail investors. This idea that you can start doing something that you believe is, what you're supposed to be doing, right? Which is like investing, and then suddenly be cross-promoted to products that are effectively like casino-fired trading platforms, where you're not really buying the product, you're just betting on the price movements, right? That's kind of,
right.
That is extremely pernicious, and people can lose more than their initial deposit, which I think is another thing that shouldn't be allowed. But anyway, for someone with a gambling addiction, it puts them at an even higher risk. And we're always looking for new products that emerge that might be associated with gambling related harm. So there's obviously, we've talked a bit about the prediction markets. There's other kind of platforms that, fantasy sports is another one, where people are engaging more than is in their interest, or more than they otherwise intended, because these are very, very similar to gambling. They've got gambling mechanics, I would call them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sportsman Dan, actually, I was on his podcast yesterday. So shout out Dan. He said, agreed, great chat. Options trading is much too accessible. Also, these Kalshi ads are everywhere, it seems. Yeah, these predictive markets are just becoming more and more visible, mainstream, popular. So it's an alternative.
We had a bit of like, because obviously it's a bit of everything's a bit of a grey area now. Like everything seems to want to become gamblified to some extent, right? So even when we had Robinhood, before they did the agreement with Kalshi, it's either Kalshi or Polymarkets they've got a kind of agreement with.
And Fanatics launched their own version too. It's called Fanatics Markets. Right.
So Robinhood is where you buy shares, right? It's a platform. It's frictionless trading, but it's designed for you. It's designed in a way to get you to overtrade, to get you to constantly change your position, because they make money, make commission on the trades, right? So it's this like it's the kind of perversion really of something that is supposed to be promoting good behavior or associated with good behavior. I'm going to invest in an S&P 500 tracker fund, right? Good, very good, right? But like bad, and this is not investment advice, obviously. Bad is I'm going to buy individual stocks in individual companies and check it every day. And when it looks red, I'm going to feel compelled to change my position and constantly overtrade and become obsessed with it. And it completely takes over my life. And then on top of that, the platform then wants you to get onto prediction markets and all this kind of stuff, which is not good behavior, right? So it's like not really what you would want to encourage people to do.
Totally.
And so I think we were vindicated really with the decision to block some of these frictionless trading platforms. Even some users say, well, I do use Robinhood. So well, there are others available that are not like totally casino-fied, which I think is a big problem.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, there's always going to be a gray area, right? Like the Gamblers Anonymous 12-step program, the Yellow Book, strictly defines gambling as any activity that involves some form of chance, where you don't know the outcome of something you're putting money towards. So that could apply to something like a 401k or a Roth IRA or any sort of long-term life investment. So it's a gray area. We're not saying you can't invest in your 401k anymore. It's just a matter of making sure that you have it set up in such a way where you are reducing any potential harm and making it practically impossible for you to manipulate or change the outcome of something as a result of your compulsion or compulsive behavior. So my next question for you is one thing people, sometimes struggle with, I think, is this idea of removal friction, right? The fact that Gamban is intentionally designed so that it's really almost impossible to uninstall from your smartphone. Why is that such a core part of the design?
Because people will try to circumvent. So there's a couple of things. Like, firstly, I think there's a type of user that will, and I would be like this, that would download Gamban and immediately try to remove it, and it just because they want to test it to see if to give them peace of mind, protect it. There are other users that will not do that. They will just download it, and that will be, it's almost kind of works as a bit of a placebo in a way. But for the first type of user, the removal friction is very important. And that's not to say that the second type of user might not try to access gambling at some stage. They might do, and it needs to work. And that if they do get an overwhelming urge to gamble, they can't be able, be in any position to take it off. But I think that it's more important for the peace of mind of someone who has tried to quit in the past without blocking software and wants to feel like, that they can't gamble even if they wanted to. And that really, the mentality of someone in recovery or trying to quit is one of despair. And if you can give people a bit of hope by offering them something that makes them believe that they can quit, that is a big game changer. And so look, when people want to try to remove Gamban, or they will get in touch with customer support and say, can you remove it? I need this off my devices. We won't do it, which obviously leads to some quite uncomfortable conversations. But the thing that we will try to do is say, contact us tomorrow if you still feel the same. And very often, as in like the overwhelming majority of cases, people will say, thanks for not removing it, not letting me.
Yeah, you need to be sort of removed from that moment of, that's what we always talk about in recovery, is this concept of urge surfing, getting through that feeling of temptation where your mind is just, not really making sense. It's just being really irrational in the moment, and you just need to get through that and then come out the other side, and you realize when you land softly that, wow, like, what was I thinking, right? It's like that moment of realization when you wake up the morning after, just going balls to the wall, full tilt. It's the most sickening, awful pit in your stomach that you can really experience. And, I personally have felt that one too many times. And I hate that feeling more than anything. So that's why it's so important to just catch yourself. And I think something like, what you're talking about is really important.
Yeah, definitely. It's the urge to gamble or to do anything that you're addicted to does not last forever. It lasts a few minutes, really. I mean, that's it. I'd like to do some more investigation on that, on how long, like, particularly gambling addiction urges last, because that's the thing we always explain to treatment providers or gambling regulators or whoever we're working with, sort of say that if someone really wants to gamble, they can go and buy a new device, or they can go and, like, I don't know, go to a venue or something, right? But Gamban works because those things take too long. And by the time you've done those things, there's enough friction in the way that the urge goes. And that's the thing. Like, I'd love to know more about how long, I suppose everyone's different, but like, we're not talking about an urge that will kind of last hours and hours. And every time you get those urges subsequently, they will be, less intense, right? So it's like anything you're addicted to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all of this ties directly back into the hobby and collecting. In collecting, it's rarely, I want to gamble per se. It's like one more rip, one more break, one more purchase, just, frantically checking comps and watching live breaks. And, suddenly next thing you know, it's 2 a.m. and you begin chasing. You're a bystander, you're watching, you're telling yourself you're going to, refrain from participating, and then a $15 team becomes available and you're like, I got to grab that. You miss. And now suddenly, next thing you know, you're thousands of dollars in the hole. So it's almost identical from that standpoint. So that's a good segue over to our next segment, which is gambling adjacent platforms and the modern hobby. So Gamban started in gambling, but today the internet is full of platforms that behave like gambling, even if they aren't legally defined that way, which we've already sort of touched on. From where you sit, what makes a platform gambling adjacent?
Obviously, the ability to deposit money and to wager it, to enter into a game of chance where you can win something that is valuable. Whether that's something that is of value, is a tradable asset, I think is irrelevant. So I think, for example, video game loot boxes should be regulated as gambling. Like, that's my general view, is that I think actually there's gambling mechanics in there. There's elements of collecting there as well. Like, particularly if you've ever played FIFA Ultimate Team or games like that, where it's pretty clear that there's a compulsive element there. And I think, so something like skins betting, which is obviously a growing phenomenon, where you're able to purchase the skins on the Valve or Steam marketplace, and then transact them off platform on casinos that allow you to wager skins as currency, and then
that's crazy,
and then cash that out for money. So to draw attention to this, we partnered with an esports team called Ecstatic, which is they play Counter-Strike 2. And they're one of very few teams that has refused gambling sponsorship. And in accordance with that, we've worked together to build awareness around the skins casinos, which I think is obviously the most egregious element of that. But that's just, I think, another example. The skins casinos, the skins trading, where people are transacting to try to make a gain, whether that gain is monetary or whether it's value in the context of a game.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild that so many different categories and platforms tap into those mechanics, because they know very well that that's how you get people to continue transacting. It's really, it's not by accident or coincidence. This is really by design. And so we talk a lot at Collectors MD about the mechanics mattering more than the category itself across different verticals, sports cards, sneakers, crypto, day trading, these mystery repacks, the gaming, the loot boxes, and the gotcha games. What patterns do you see, repeating in terms of all of these different, I mean, they're adjacent, but they're all pretty different in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, I think really a lot of the mechanics that you're talking about originate in the gambling industry. I think that's where these types of practices are kind of honed, because gambling is the most, it's the sharp end of trying to get someone to do something that isn't in their interest, right? It's to kind of ensnare people. I think certain gambling products are that, they're a trap. And there's a very famous quote from Len Ainsworth, who was the chairman of Aristocrat, which was a slot machine company. He's an Australian guy. And they said, what's the secret to your success? And he said, building a better mousetrap, right? That's the attitude of the industry. It's always been about deploying psychology and deploying behavioral nudges and all that kind of stuff to get you to do those things. So I think a lot of the addictive elements of these other platforms have borrowed from what the gambling industry has learned over many, many years, and obviously the online gambling taken to another level. And I think even if you look at social media, the news feed on X, you pull that down to refresh it. That's the slot machine mechanic, right? It's there's so many different things that social media companies have borrowed as well, to keep you engaged. And the fight is for people's attention, and to get people to spend more and more time
Absolutely.
cumulatively on that activity. And then when you combine that with monetary loss, you're exacerbating the harm, right?
Right. It's a great point because it's not just necessarily spending money. It could be doom scrolling on social media. The idea is they want to keep you engaged. They want to keep you interacting. Something like a social media platform like TikTok or Instagram, they make a lot of money through advertising revenue. And the more time spent by the individual user, the more opportunity they have with potential advertisers. I mentioned to you, I was in media and advertising sales for about 13 years. So I understand and I've seen firsthand how that industry operates from that perspective. So, there's a gray area once again, like, with the marketing itself, like, is it predatory? Is it exploitative? Does it need to be regulated or standardized? Probably at some point. There are layers to it. Every industry is a little bit different. But when we see fanatics basically borrowing their marketing strategy, tactics, messaging to nudge customers on the casino side, using that same verbiage within Fanatics Live. And again, we're not here to call them out or be a watchdog or say what they're doing is wrong per se. But when we see that firsthand, I'm talking about a message that says, "We've missed you. Here's 10, or we've missed you. Spend $10,000 in the next 48 hours, receive $1,000 in rewards." All you have to do is participate in something that you already love. So, click this button to download Fanatics Live again and get back into the action. Something along those lines. Like, that messaging is exactly this out of the same playbook as what the casinos use. And again, Fanatics has their own casino and sports book. And so it's all sort of just intertwined. They're borrowing from one another in order to sort of help propel each one of these spokes, these categories forward. So, when we say something like the hobby can feel like a casino, does that resonate with you and your experience, working within like harm prevention?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And as you say, it's not by accident. It's not a coincidence. I think there's so many things that have become like casino-fied, even shopping apps, right? Where
Sure.
like retail, like general. Have you, there's plenty of them that like seem like that,
Yeah.
and
The countdown timers and you left something behind in your cart,
yeah,
that sort of messaging.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly. And even like delivery apps or whatever, like everything is using that to try to keep you coming back. And
Yep.
look, that you could argue that there is with a legitimate industry, they have a right to promote the services. You can argue that. You can argue all this kind of stuff. But I think that there is a point at which that crosses a line into using people's personal information to profile them without their consent in order to try to manipulate them into doing something that they wouldn't otherwise have done.
Right.
That's not marketing for me. Marketing is raising awareness of a product or service. That's a form of manipulation, digital manipulation, which again crosses the line, and it does so not just in gambling; it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So, yeah, I think what stands out to me is that we're not calling everything addiction. We're saying that some environments are just engineered to be very hard to step away from. And if a platform triggers the same loop, it deserves the same guardrail. So we're going to transition over to segment 4, which is layered risk exclusion and the stack that holds. So one thing Gamban emphasizes is layering, not just one tool, but a stack. Why is a multi-layered approach so important?
We've encouraged people to obviously not just download Gamban, but sign up to self-exclusion. In the UK, many of the banks now offer the ability to switch off gambling transactions, so you can't deposit into a gambling site. If that's available in your country, then obviously that's something that we would encourage people to do. To speak to a gambling helpline, to present for treatment or support, to speak to someone about any gambling debts that you might have. We encourage people to take as many steps as possible on a road to recovery, and to not believe or think that installing Gamban is enough necessarily, right? To think about things that might trigger a relapse at some stage, and cover those off while they're in that mind frame of wanting to take positive action. So yeah, layering is super important. I mean, we want to make sure that if there's one thing that if one barrier isn't enough, there's another barrier in place. It creates more friction. It makes it more difficult for that person to act on the urge to gamble, and hopefully they get through those urges, and then they kind of dissipate over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gamban is, again, it's just one layer. There are so many other layers that need to be implemented in order to really see change. And we always say, look, gambling addiction is it's a disease. It destroys from the inside out. It's insidious. There are really no redeeming qualities. And recovery is a lifelong commitment. You don't just stop gambling or self-exclude or download Gamban and suddenly you're healed. You're still going to have those urges, those temptations. You're still going to have the same thoughts running through your head. So it's really, really important that you seek additional support beyond just the software. So I really, really, again, commend you guys for layering that into your messaging. So I want to bring this back to the hobby again. For somebody who's trying to step away from breaking apps or high-risk marketplaces, what do you think a layered plan could look like beyond just deleting the app or downloading Gamban?
So I think the work you're doing is great. I think obviously, I think speaking to people who are going through that as well is really important. I think that should be encouraged, and if there's any communities that people can get involved with, that would be, I think, really helpful and beneficial to understand that they're not alone, and these things are, by design, and lots of people are getting addicted to them. It does really very help. It helps with your own sense of stigma that you might feel a bit, or shame, sorry. And I think understanding how this has happened, the process by which it's happened, educating people on that is really important as well, because that can really tackle the stigma. So that is one thing. They may want to. I don't know the degree to which there are support groups or peer support groups, or the degree to which that there's treatment or therapy or anything like that. I think cognitive behavioural therapy is very good. That's something I did. I would encourage people to do that if they can, if they're able to, because it helps you see something differently. Like when you're addicted to something, your brain is telling you to do it because it's like feeding the addiction. And so the addiction's like sort of telling you to do this thing, and it's not in your interest, but it comes up with very, very good reasons why you should do it. And so the therapy helps you recalibrate all of that and understand that that's not good for you. It's not in your interest. And I think, having gone through that myself, it's made it easier for me to quit other things. So in the future, after I was addicted to gambling, I was addicted to nicotine, and I quit that, and I found that a lot easier having gone through that therapy and understood myself better, right? So I'd encourage everyone to do that. And then obviously Gamban hopefully will block the sites and the apps. Anything that's not blocked, people can report. If there's things that we've missed, we'll get that blocked almost immediately. But I think talking about it's so important. I think in some way, if people can talk about it, even if it's an anonymous forum, it does make a massive difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate you acknowledging what we're doing at Collectors MD, just in terms of educating and getting the word out there and offering an outlet for people who really need it. But we currently offer a weekly support group meeting on Wednesday nights. We offer another touch point on Thursday nights in partnership with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado, which is a meeting called Unboxed, powered by Collectors MD. They follow the same, sort of curriculum. They've adapted our modules. They use the recovery guide to provide our community and their community with additional support beyond just the Wednesday meetings. But it's so important that you stay connected in between these meetings. And there are other tools, resources, outlets that you could tap into if you're struggling with anything that we're talking about here today. So that's just something we emphasize constantly. Tools don't replace accountability, they just support it. So you really need to, implement a plan that, is realistic, that's sustainable, that, you'll be able to stick to over time. Because if you just inundate yourself and become overwhelmed, you're just going to burn yourself out. So with that, we're going to transition over to our fifth segment, which is progress tracking and momentum. You added progress tracking to Gamban. Days gamble free, time saved, money saved. Why is that so important?
It was something that a lot of our users were requesting. And we initially, when we started Gamban, we just focused on the blocking. We didn't really think much of the app. The app was really just a mechanism by which you could get the protection onto the device. And we realized obviously that there was a lot that we could do with the app that we weren't doing. And, as well as announcements and blogs and things like that, we wanted to make some kind of tracker for people. So they can see how they can put how much money they were spending or losing into the app. They can put how much time they spent gambling, and then obviously the day that they started with Gamban or the day they started to quit, and that tracks it all. And we've seen on loads of forums, public forums like Reddit and others, people screenshotting the progress and posting it, and they're very proud of it, and that's great. And I think it's so important to frame recovery in that way. By quitting gambling or quitting the activity that I'm addicted to, I am saving myself, my future self, all of this money and time. And obviously I've done well to quit and be abstinent for this amount of days and whatever. Yeah. But when you quit, you're preventing future losses, because a lot of people, when they're in the midst of addiction, they'll feel like, I've got to chase my previous losses. You're never going to do that. You're just going to get more and more in debt. Even if you were to win, you would give it all back because you're addicted. Sure. So it's about that positive message, and I think that's why it's helpful for people. It's positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and it mimics other types of addiction. There are plenty of apps that exist within substance and alcohol addiction where you can track how many days you've been sober. And so when you are paying attention to something like that, it allows you to, hold yourself accountable and also be able to see your progress. So what do you hear the most often from users once they start seeing that progress reflected back to them?
The feedback is amazing. They are very, very complimentary of Gamban and how much it's helped them, and it's great. It's really great to hear it, and I'm so pleased for everyone that has been able to quit, because I know how hard it is to quit gambling addiction.
Yeah.
So people will be very overjoyed really about how much it's helped them, and I think the day tracker in particular, and the milestones, and when someone reaches, say, 30 days, they'll get a badge and they'll get a notification, and it will kind of remind them that how far they've come. And I think it's because it's one of the first things people do when they quit, and because I think it is so difficult to quit now without some kind of blocking, because of the nature of how people are accessing gambling. I think that they recognize, obviously, that it's quite an important component of enabling them to quit. I mean, it's not that it's not that people can't do it themselves. It's just that it's so difficult now to do that because of the way that we kind of interact with our devices, and the way that we have to have a smartphone really for work, or we have to have a smartphone to keep in touch with people. It's cruel in a way that on that same device that can lead to so much positive, productive activity, you can actually enjoy your life. It's kind of very, very weird time that we live in, and that's kind of normalized as well.
Yeah, yeah. That it really is so important, and it's great to hear that you're receiving such positive feedback from users. There's just something so powerful about momentum, especially in recovery, and especially early on. So, um, that's great to hear. When your identity is still like sort of shifting, your lifestyle is changing drastically, and you're going through these changes. It can be really really tough. So it also can be really hard to stay on course. Sometimes it's just easiest solution feels like just going back to the old habit that you were made you feel comfortable in that moment. So um, like a lot of things in life, whether it be you're a job or losing weight or exercising or pretty much anything, like just once you see a little bit of results, a little bit of momentum, things become a lot easier.
Definitely. Yeah. And one day at a time. Yeah.
One day at a time. Absolutely. Shout out Rob Minnick. We're going to shift over to our final segment, which is where this is going, design ethics, regulation, and responsibility. So we're still largely unregulated in terms of the hobby. In gambling, there are a lot of obviously adjacent spaces beyond just the hobby, but the hobby specifically has no regulation, no oversight. So what do you think people misunderstand most about harm in digital environments?
I think that there's a lack of awareness about how some things can be very addictive, even if they're not, gambling sites, right? And that the propensity for people to over engage with them is quite significant. So I think there needs to be some kind of different type of regulation. This is not a normal consumer activity if you're trying to, if the interest, your interest as a vendor and the interests of the consumer are not aligned. That's not a normal consumer activity. You should be wanting to have happy customers, right? That's how it's supposed to work. If you want your customers to lose more money than they plan to or they're comfortable with, then we've got problems here, and that needs regulation. In my view, that that's the thing. I think it probably should span lots of sectors now, and we touched on obviously Robinhood and the predictions and like the conflation of financial investment platforms and gambling would have basically become gambling sites de facto, and they need better regulation as well. I think consumers are getting misled by a lot of these platforms. So I just want people to, so I think what you've talked about with the hobby, right, and collecting seems to be a similar trajectory to gambling, where gambling has existed in Britain for a long time and then it went online, and it just made everything, it's like turbocharged everything.
Right.
All of these like mechanics were inserted into that process, into that user experience, and it's kind of like made it much worse as a result, and people are now much more likely to get addicted. That's
Sure.
kind of what I think is where there's similarities. So I think addictive technology, addictive platforms, they all need to be regulated properly.
Yeah, well said. I'm curious, how popular is the hobby, the sports card and TCG hobby in the UK?
I wouldn't be able to say for sure because it's not something that I see.
Gotcha.
It's definitely uh, exists, and there
Yeah.
is definitely we've got something called Warhammer 40,000 as well, which I don't know if you have, but like
It was like the little figurines that you could
Yeah.
paint. Yeah.
or it's called, I think Games Workshop is the premises. I mean, I'm sure that there are people that collect that compulsively. I'm sure that that's an
Sure.
issue. There's obviously the Pokemon cards. There's all sorts of auction websites and things like that, and online that people are engaging with. So definitely a problem.
Yeah.
The scale, I'm not sure, and I think it's something that needs investigating.
Yeah, it would be interesting to better understand how popular it truly is in the UK. Both in traditional forms and modern collectible trends, right? So we do know, like we have heard from a number of UK-based hobby shops and break groups that are interested in joining the movement and getting involved in everything we're doing around responsible ripping and responsible engagement in the hobby. So that's great. That's a great sign. And of course, the hobby has gone global. I mean, it's almost, I think it's more popular in Asia than it is here, believe it or not.
Right.
If you could hear the dogs barking, I told you before, I'm at my parents' house. They have 4 dogs. They're currently outside and I could hear them, but that's what you're hearing. So obviously we're talking about gambling adjacent spaces. Do you believe guardrails can coexist with entertainment within these gambling adjacent spaces?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. I think it's very. I think the industry would look very different. I think that's the problem, that that's why the industry resists these guardrails. And
Yeah,
I think the nature of their business model, their commercial model, is that they derive the vast majority of the profits from, the 5% or so of customers who are losing more than they can afford, who are experiencing harm. So we'd probably have a smaller gambling industry. It would probably be recalibrated to a large extent. Uh, I'm a bit of an optimist, so I think that you can regulate gambling to the extent that you minimize the harm. But then I'm reminded constantly about the scorpion and the frog. I don't know if you ever heard that story
sure.
where, yeah, and the scorpion, kills the frog, and it's like, why have you done that? So it's all I know, right? And it's kind of like, that's kind of the gambling industry, right? It's like, it's all they know
All they know.
is to extract from people
Yeah,
who've got problems. So like, could they do it? I mean, it would need a complete rethink about how, but
yeah. Different perspective, right?
absolutely. But I think the entertainment can exist. I don't think people are getting addicted by betting, on single event bets on particular games or like all that kind of stuff, right? I think people are getting addicted because they're being cross promoted the more harmful content, and they're trying to get them to engage far more frequently than they otherwise would have. And that's the thing. It's like, it's not the gambling necessarily, it's how it's being delivered and how they're trying to get people to engage with it.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that comparison. It's just a really good metaphor for, like, how we understand these gambling adjacent industries, especially when people are sort of surprised by like outcomes they weren't warned about, right? And I think um the loot boxes and the repacks and the blind boxes with Labubu, even, like, the business model really is that whole concept. And it's not until they start to see movements like us or just advocacy around change and reform, do those people even, it like doesn't even dawn on them until then that there are some problems here. There's some harm being done. They're just, at the end of the day, and we say this all the time about like break groups, right? Like a breaker goes on Whatnot and is just being really aggressive and just like, you have to buy this, it's a value break, you guys are paying too low on these spots, like we got to get the prices up. Just all that sense of like pressure, urgency, FOMO, it exists across the entire hobby, especially these live platforms. And a part of me feels like it's not really the fault of the breaker. This is just like, they're just doing their job. This is what they know. This is what they've been taught. This is how they've been trained. And they're just operating basically as like dealers within a casino. They're doing their job. They're trying to maximize revenue for the company that they work for, which is what anybody would do in that sort of role, right?
Exactly.
Which is why quite so often we hear this analogy of like the car salesman, right? Like a car salesman working at a dealership, their job is to sell the car and to maximize the return on each vehicle. And so quite often you go in there and you're like, this guy's being a little bit like pushy and he's throwing in all these bells and whistles that are unnecessary. And you start to question the whole process. Well, that same thing applies, I think, in a lot of these verticals, a lot of these adjacent verticals. So you just have to, sorry, go ahead.
No, definitely. And that's the thing. The gambling industry, gambling operators are behaving rationally, and they're behaving in an entirely predictable way. And anyone who believes that they're going to forego profit to be socially responsible is extremely foolish, right? There's no, we need to be eyes open, and we need to just accept that they will do what they can get away with to maximize profit. That's a perfectly rational and predictable way to perceive the gambling industry, and that's how we should. It's logical, and that's how regulators should approach it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in regulators and in treatment and even in advocacy, unfortunately, that just buy this lie, this public relations propaganda, that the gambling industry somehow cares about responsible gambling and cares about safer gambling.
Yeah.
Let's just get real, right?
Yeah.
They care about increasing shareholder value, right? As they're legally obliged to. So, therefore, you need regulation, and it needs to be adequate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Before we wrap up here, while you were just talking, I couldn't help myself. I had to look up the scorpion and frog story to like better understand it, because I had heard it before. But I found this article, and I want to read it real quick just to give people more context around what you're talking about. So the story goes, a scorpion asks a frog to carry him across a river. The frog hesitates. You'll sting me. The scorpion replies, why would I? If I sting you, we'll both drown. Halfway across, the scorpion stings the frog anyway. As they sink, the frog asks why. The scorpion says, I couldn't help it. It's my nature. That line, it's my nature, is the entire point. And this actually draws the parallel to gambling and gambling adjacent spaces. So it's been brought up before. And so in gambling adjacent spaces, things like the sports betting, traditional gambling, obviously, but the sports cards, the TCG, it lists a bunch of them here. The business model is sort of the scorpion, right? Not the people working there, not every operator, but the incentive structure. These industries are built on things like volume over restraint, urgency over reflection, loss normalization, intermittent reward, and asymmetric risk. When harm happens, the response is often, we didn't mean for this to happen. We provide disclaimers. It's entertainment. People should be responsible. But those explanations miss the point. The scorpion didn't sting because he was evil. He stung because his survival depended on behavior that eventually causes harm. So it goes on to say why warnings and good intentions don't change outcome. The frog wasn't naive. He knew the risk. He made a rational argument. He even received reassurance. Sound familiar? Consumers are told, set limits, know when to stop. This is for fun. Odds are posted. You're in control. But when an industry's profit depends on people staying longer, spending more, and chasing losses, restraint becomes a threat, not a goal. So even when platforms promise reform, operators talk about responsibility, influencers say don't spend what you can't lose, the system still stings, not because of malice, but because changing behavior would mean changing the business model. And it goes on. I mean, this is really sharp. It really touches on the exact point you made. So we can't change. I want to go take a step back real quick and just also reiterate that our goal with Collectors MD isn't to force reform or change across these gambling adjacent industries. It's to provide support for the people that are hurting. We want to be the destination, the safe haven, if you will, for people who really are just looking for an outlet to connect with other people who are also going through facing similar challenges. So we will advocate for reform. We will absolutely support it, but our jurisdiction, our lane, again, isn't to force changes. So we can't sit here and act like, these breakers, these platforms, these manufacturers have to change their business model. Frankly, it's none of our business how they operate themselves from a business standpoint. We're not going to step in and start policing that. That's not our role. That's not our job, right? So it's just really important to call that out, because a lot of people have the misconception, I think, that Collectors MD is some sort of watchdog or um, regulator or trying to police things. That's not what it's about. And again, it's not our lane or really our responsibility to change those things. Again, we'll help push the message, we'll push for education and awareness around why those changes need to happen, but we can't move mountains on our own. So with that, I want to transition over to our rapid fire round. This is I'm going to ask you 8 questions, and you're going to hit me with the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
All right. If you could change one thing tomorrow about how platforms think about responsibility, what would it be?
I would. I would. One thing.
And don't worry, if nothing comes to mind, you could just say skip. So you're not the first person to like.
So I think I would make it. I would introduce duty of care. So if someone is spending excessively on any platform, whatever it is, that operator makes sure that person can afford it, and that's just as simple. For me, that's simple customer service, and that should be enshrined in the regulation.
Yeah, well said. What's one sign someone is moving from fun to compulsion?
Probably that when they've stopped doing the activity, that they start thinking very quickly after that about the next time they're going to do that activity.
What's the most underrated boundary someone can set with their phone?
I would say being able to leave right. So I did this thing, right? I went on vacation and I left my phone in my room all day, and I've never felt like I was on holiday more than
it's crazy.
That particular trip.
You do that, and you just feel so liberating.
If you can leave your phone alone for the whole day, that's a good test.
The smartphones have become an extension of our bodies, and it's not healthy. No. Best first 24 hours advice after installing Gamban?
I would say that you'll feel very motivated, and you'll feel a lot of euphoria or relief, and in that moment, make plans, make progress, make as much progress as you can, getting everything ready.
And maybe just put your phone away too, just like you suggested. So it's not even like, sort of in your peripheral. What triggers cause relapses the most? Stress, boredom, access, secrecy, or something else?
I think it's actually grief. I think it's actually grief and trauma. Moments, very particularly difficult moments. I think that when we're in recovery, we learn to not do the thing we're addicted to in all sorts of different contexts, and we're going to feel stressed quite a lot. We're going to feel lots of different emotions quite a lot, but we might not feel trauma and grief very often. Hopefully not, anyway. So when we do feel that can be a big risk. So obviously, make sure there's people around you if you're going through something.
Absolutely. What's one myth about addiction you wish would disappear?
That people are so weak if they get addicted to something, or they don't have willpower, or I'd like people to understand that behavioral addictions are the same as addictions to substances. What's happening in the brain is the same. It's the same chemical reactions. So to understand that whatever's triggering it, it can be a substance that triggers a chemical reaction in your brain, or it can be an activity. So understanding that they're very, very similar processes.
If someone, let's say, finds a way to slip or relapse after downloading Gamban, blocking the apps, maybe self-excluding, what's the next right move?
To tell someone that's close to them, to create accountability, or reinforce accountability, and get in touch with us, and we can figure out why that happened, why people, whether that was a site we hadn't blocked, or whether the protection wasn't installed properly, and we can get you back on the saddle.
Well said. And lastly, in addition to, or let's say excluding app blocking software, self-excluding, what's one guardrail you'd recommend for any risky spending vertical, not just gambling?
If it's possible to set limits, or if it's possible to keep, do you know what? Actually, I think if you're in a relationship, to have a joint account and to have accountability with your partner about money
Yeah,
that's spent, money that's going out of the account, that is the best thing you can do. I mean, for everyone, right, is to like actually have to justify what you're spending money on to someone else, someone you love and is close to you, right? It's not like, yeah.
Honesty, transparency is crucial. It's critical to any relationship, and it's so important in recovery. Not just being honest with yourself, but your inner circle, those around you, your peers, your friends, family, colleagues. So we always say in recovery, if you can set a guardrail, absolutely turn your finances over to like a loved one or someone you trust. Even obviously a joint account helps too, because it provides that transparency. But if you're really, really struggling and you feel like you're hopeless and you have no control, really handing over the finances to someone else can really make a difference. Matt, this was an incredibly important and impactful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. What stands out to me is that none of this is about restriction. It's about protection. Guardrails create space. Space makes better decisions possible. This isn't about canceling hobbies or banning platforms. It's about giving people control back in systems designed to take it away. If you want to learn more about Gamban or download the app, or you want to learn more about Matt's work, check out Gamban.com. All links are in the description below. And if anything in today's conversation resonated with you, whether it's about spending, pressure, or feeling stuck in one more cycles, Collectors MD is here as a resource. We host free peer support meetings every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern and a Thursday group in partnership with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado called Unboxed, powered by Collectors MD. You can find all of our content, tools, resources, and support offerings at collectorsmd.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Collectors Compass on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all major streaming platforms. And check out our other shows, Behind the Breaks and Collectors MD features. I'm Alyx Efron. This is the Collectors Compass, reminding you to collect with intention, not compulsion. We'll see you next time.